Hello and welcome to another TLDR US video. Recently, the House of Representatives passed a new stimulus bill known as the HEROES Act, with a total price tag of around $3 trillion, which unsurprisingly has stirred up a bit of controversy. So today we're going to break down that bill, what's in it, what's angering Republicans about it, and whether or not it will pass a vote in the Senate. The process of actually passing a bill can be quite confusing, so we'll be putting out a video tomorrow on how these kind of laws are actually passed, so be sure to hit the bell icon to be notified when that video is released. Also, it's not just the US making plans like this. If you want to know what Europe's €500 billion plan looks like, there's a link to our TLDR EU video on the topic below. First things first, what's in the bill? For starters, it contains a new wave of stimulus checks. If passed, it would have a similar structure to the first wave of direct payments. They would give each eligible person $1,200 and would be available in full to Americans earning $75,000 or less a year, with the size of the check decreasing as the person's income increases beyond this point. These checks, however, would differ from those given out earlier in the year in that they would not require the submission of a social security number, and would instead accept taxpayer ID numbers. This would mean that non-citizens who are participating in the economy would be eligible to receive payments too, an issue that many Republicans object to. Along with these payments, there's also a large amount of money in the bill that would go towards state and local governments. Many of these governments are struggling to maintain themselves and continue providing necessary services, especially as coronavirus continues to ravage the economy. As such, the bill sets aside $500 billion for state governments, $375 billion for local governments, and various other monetary injections for territories, tribal communities, and other organisations in need. The bill also contains funding for testing and contact tracing, an issue that the government is still grappling with. This money is meant to help the US's testing and tracing capacity, in the hopes that this will speed up the reopening process. If you're confused by the whole testing situation and why more tests and contact tracing would help the US reopen faster, then there's links to videos on both topics in the description. On top of big issues like direct payments, government funding, and testing aid, the HEROES Act also expands on a number of issues from previous bills passed in the last few months. This includes the further expansion of unemployment insurance, help for small businesses, and an increase in aid for food security programs like SNAP. These are all measures designed to help more vulnerable people who may be facing unemployment or a decline of a family business. This comes as the unemployment rate continues to rise to levels that have not been seen since the Great Depression in the 1930s. Along these lines, the bill also contains rent and mortgage relief measures that many Democrats have argued are essential to protecting people's housing situations. The final major set of issues that this bill addresses are those of the Postal Service and the expansion of voting safety measures. The Postal Service has long been facing economic hardship, and with the importance of mailing services at a time when many are still unable to leave their homes, the House has set aside $25 billion to keep the USPS afloat. There's also the issue of being able to use said postal service to vote. The HEROES Act is set to give financial support to states seeking to expand vote by mail, as well as states that need protective equipment for in-person poll workers. And this is where the controversy really begins. Many Republicans have argued that much of this is just the Democrats attempting to use the coronavirus to push through their own agenda. The money being set aside for vote expansion measures in particular has come under fire from the right for its support of mail-in voting. And here it's worth quickly discussing the controversy over voting by mail. President Trump has recently gone on a hard offensive against voting by mail, arguing that it's ripe for voter fraud. This claim, however, doesn't have a lot of basis in reality. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, mail-in ballots are more susceptible to fraud, but only by an incredibly small percent, and according to them, are still by far the best option during a pandemic. For reference, more than 100 million mail-in ballots have been sent out by Oregon since 2000. And in that time, there have only been about a dozen cases of voter fraud, so not exactly enough to swing an election. It's also worth noting that mail-in voting doesn't seem to benefit either particular party. Of the 5 states who currently use vote by mail as their primary form of voting, only 3, Washington, Oregon and Hawaii, are reliably blue, with one more, Colorado, being fairly purple, and the final, Utah, being solidly red. Despite this, Trump has indicated that he won't be backing down anytime soon, so this will almost certainly be an area of great debate, not just during the Senate's debate on the HEROES Act, but also for the foreseeable future as well. One of the other major controversies around the new relief legislation is the issue of corporate immunity. Essentially, state Republicans want to see protections for businesses facing lawsuits related to COVID-19. The thinking here is that many businesses are worried about being sued if one of their employees contracts coronavirus while working. So providing immunity for businesses in that situation would allow them to reopen with more confidence. This is an issue that Republicans have been very adamant about including in the next relief bill, with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell referring to the issue as a red line for him in a Fox interview at the end of April. This is likely setting the stage for a political brawl, as the Democrats see McConnell as trying to protect business owners at the expense of workers. And given the House's bill contains no such corporate immunity, it's likely that we'll see a great deal of debate over the issue in the coming weeks. The final significant controversy is the simple fact that the HEROES Act will cost roughly $3 trillion. It will be the most expensive piece of legislation in US history, and will greatly expand the national debt, something that most Republicans are just not happy to sign on to. The number of issues that the bill attempts to address doesn't help the situation, as each issue in the bill brings with it the need to give out more money. Senate Republicans will likely use this to argue that the bill's spending is not just excessive, but largely pointless. Democrats, in turn, will likely try and make the case that the spending is both justified and essential to allowing the country to move forward on its path to reopening. All of this brings the question at the centre of any piece of legislation: will it pass? The short answer is, well, probably not. As we mentioned, Republicans are already taking issue with a number of the funding allocations in the bill, and this debate is only going to get more intense as the Senate moves closer to taking a vote on the bill. With the lack of corporate immunity, the money for voter expansion measures, and the $3 trillion price tag, getting even a couple of Republicans to vote for the bill would be something close to a miracle, so getting enough votes for it to actually pass just isn't looking feasible at the moment. And this isn't something that Senate leadership has been subtle about. Numerous Republicans have voiced their qualms with the bill in recent weeks, and Majority Leader McConnell has been particularly vocal on this matter. He's regularly referred to the bill as a political statement and as an unserious proposition, citing the addition of funding for what he views as issues are relevant to the coronavirus relief effort. And while he likely made such claims for the sake of rhetoric, he may not be entirely wrong in referring to the bill as a political statement. When the first major relief bill was drafted by the Senate, House Democrats frequently voiced their frustration that the Senate had gotten ahead of them in drafting the bill. The thought process here is that if the Democratic-controlled House drafts the initial legislation, then they'll have the bargaining tools, instead of having to work with a bill written by the Republican-controlled Senate. As such, it's not unlikely that Speaker Pelosi and her team saw this bill as an opportunity, not necessarily to pass all of the relief efforts her party would like to see implemented, but to make a political statement on her commitment to work towards these goals. In doing so, she's put the ball firmly in Mitch McConnell's court, forcing him to make decisions about what to compromise on and what to let go. So, while this bill in its current form may not pass the Senate or make it past the president's desk without being vetoed for that matter, it puts Democrats in a good position going forward. With their priorities made clear, they'll likely be able to manoeuvre some sort of compromise out of McConnell and Trump, in exchange for keeping some aspects of the HEROES Act. We'll keep you up to date on these events as they play out, so be sure to subscribe and come back for our video tomorrow on how this kind of legislation is actually passed. Also, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you want to find out more about Europe's efforts, their $500 billion recovery plan, then be sure to click the link to TLDR EU in the description. On the channel, you'll also find other videos on the topic, including our analysis of Sweden's non-lockdown approach, whether the country's decisions to never fully lock down have worked, or if they are a mistake. If you want to find more from us across all social networks, simply search for TLDR News. Special thanks to our Patreon backers for making videos like this one possible.